A NATO country is threatened not by Russia, not by China, but by the United States. The President of America says his country does not just want Greenland. It needs Greenland. And he refuses to rule out force. This is not a joke. It is not a tweet taken out of context. It is a signal that power may now matter more than rules. Greenland is a semi-autonomous territory. Its people are not for sale. Its future is protected by international law. And yet, suddenly, it is spoken of like property. European leaders rush to respond. They defend its sovereignty, borders. The basic idea that alliances mean restraint. Because if security can justify taking Greenland, then no small nation is truly safe. If you care about how global order really works, stay with me. Because this story is not really about Greenland. It is about how power thinks today and why the rules may no longer be enough. So let us slow this down. Strip away the headlines. Strip away the shock. What is actually being claimed here? The United States argues that Greenland is essential for security, for control of the Arctic, for the protection of NATO interests, but this claim creates a contradiction at the heart of the alliance. NATO exists to defend members from external threats. Greenland belongs to a NATO country, Denmark. So when the threat comes from inside the alliance, the rules begin to blur. European leaders responded with unusual unity. They did not debate strategy. They defended principles, sovereignty, territorial integrity, borders that cannot be changed by force. Because this is not only about Greenland's ice or minerals, it is about whether alliances still restrain power, or whether power now defines the alliance itself. To understand how we reached this moment, we have to look backward at history, at precedent, and at how American power has been changing over time. That story begins earlier than most people think. This did not begin with Greenland. It began with a way of thinking, a belief that security comes from control, from dominance, from shaping outcomes directly. In the past, American power worked differently. It built alliances. It set rules. It led by persuasion as much as pressure. But over time, that balance shifted. Intervention replaced restraint. Urgency replaced patience. The intervention in Venezuela marked a turning point. Elite troops, a seized president, a country openly described as something the US would run. The message was unmistakable. If America decides something is vital to its security, sovereignty becomes negotiable. Greenland enters the story through this logic, not as a nation, not as a people, but as a strategic asset, a location, a resource. The Arctic is changing. Security calculations are changing with it. And once power starts thinking in assets instead of allies, history tells us what usually comes next. That brings us to the first real rupture, the moment when words turned into fear. Then the fear became visible, not through soldiers, not through missiles, but through symbols. One day after the US raid in Venezuela, a map appeared online, Greenland, colored like the American flag, one word underneath, soon. Now, it was posted by the wife of a senior presidential aide. It did not come with an explanation. It did not need one, because by then the pattern was clear. The United States had shown it was willing to act, to seize a president, to run another country. And now Greenland was being discussed the same way. Soon after, the message hardened. A senior US official said it was the formal position of the American government that Greenland should be part of the United States. When asked about force, the answer was chillingly calm. Nobody's going to fight the US. This was the first true crisis, because threats no longer sounded hypothetical. They sounded inevitable. If power believes resistance is impossible, it stops negotiating. And that is when systems begin to break. To understand why this confidence exists, We need to look beneath the surface, at the system that makes such statements feel normal. At the center of this story is a simple assumption that power equals protection. That because the United States is the strongest force in NATO, it gets to decide what security requires. This is the hidden mechanism. NATO is described as an alliance, but in practice, it depends on American power, American troops, American funding, American reach, and over time, dependence creates imbalance. If one country sees itself as the protector, it may also see itself as the owner. This is how collective defense quietly turns into hierarchy. When Stephen Miller said the US is the power of NATO, he revealed this logic openly. Greenland, in this view, is not Danish territory. It is a strategic shield, a forward position in the Arctic. And if the shield is vital, then consent becomes optional. This is not about law. It is about leverage. Once leverage replaces legitimacy, rules survive only as long as power allows them to. That is the danger embedded in this moment. And it sets the stage for the second crisis, one that moves beyond statements and directly into people's lives. Then the tension moves closer to reality, closer to people. Denmark reacted sharply. Its prime minister issued a warning rarely heard between allies. If the United States attacked Greenland, NATO would effectively end. That sentence mattered because NATO is built on one promise. An attack on one is an attack on all. But what happens when the attacker is inside the alliance? That is the second crisis. Not a military one, an institutional one. European leaders understood this immediately. That is why 7 countries spoke together in one voice. They emphasized collective security, not unilateral action, law over force. Because if this principle breaks here, it breaks everywhere. At the same time, Greenland's own leadership spoke calmly. They asked for respectful dialogue. They invoked international law. But calm words now sit next to raw power. And when systems reach this point, history shows us something unsettling. Institutions do not collapse suddenly. They hollow out slowly, quietly. And the cost is paid not by governments first, but by ordinary people, which brings us to the human side of this crisis. Now let me speak directly to you. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing powerful people are talking about your home as if it were an object. Not a country, not a community, but a prize. That is how many Greenlanders describe this moment. They hear laughter, they hear confidence, they hear others deciding their future. And it is terrifying. Greenland has only 57,000 people. A small population, a strong identity, Kalalit Nunat. The land of the Greenlandic people, most want independence one day. On their own terms, almost none want to become American. And yet, suddenly, they are forced to imagine invasion, forced to imagine their leaders being seized, forced to imagine force as a possibility. When power talks this way, fear spreads faster than facts. If you were in their place, you would not be thinking about geopolitics. You would be thinking about safety, about dignity, about whether anyone will stop what comes next. This is why the Greenland story matters. Because behind every strategic map, there are real people holding their breath. And their fear does not stay local. It ripples outward. This is where the story stops being regional. Because what happens in Greenland does not stay in Greenland. It tests the entire global system. If a powerful NATO country can threaten another member, every alliance in the world takes note. In Europe, smaller states see a warning. Security guarantees may have conditions. And power may come with demands. Beyond Europe, rivals watch carefully. Not for what America says, but for what it does. If borders can be questioned in the Arctic, they can be questioned elsewhere. The language of sovereignty weakens. The language of force grows louder. This is how norms erode. Not all at once, but case by case. the Arctic itself becomes more than geography. It becomes precedent, control justified by minerals, by location, by security necessity, and once necessity becomes the argument, almost anything can be framed as unavoidable. That is why this moment matters globally, because when the strongest power redefines the rules, others will follow. Not with words, but with actions, which leads us to the most difficult question of all. What happens next? From here, the future splits, not into certainties, but into paths. The first path is restraint. The United States pulls back from the language of force. Security is reframed as cooperation. Greenland remains protected through NATO, not absorbed by it. Tension fades. Rules survive. The second path is ambiguity. The threats stop, but the pressure remains. Diplomacy becomes transactional. Silence replaces clarity. Nothing happens, yet fear never fully leaves. This is how instability becomes normal. Then there is the third path, the dangerous one. Power decides that resistance is irrelevant. That alliance unity is optional. That necessity overrides consent. Greenland becomes a test case, not because of aggression alone, but because no one stops it. And once that line is crossed, the international system does not reset. It adapts downward. Trust erodes. Alliances weaken. Smaller nations look elsewhere for protection. History teaches us this lesson repeatedly. When rules bend for the powerful, they eventually break for everyone. Which brings us to the final question. What does this moment demand of us? This story is not finished, because Greenland is not just a place. It is a test of whether power still accepts limits, or whether limits now exist only for the weak. The world once believed alliances restrained ambition. That law softened force. That security did not require domination. Those beliefs are being challenged in real time. What happens next will not depend only on governments. It will depend on whether people notice, whether they care, whether they remember, because systems survive on attention as much as strength. If this story made you uncomfortable, that is the point. Discomfort is often the first signal of change. Stay curious, question simple explanations, and watch moments like this carefully. If you want to understand how power is reshaping the world, this is where it begins. Follow this channel, share this conversation, because the future of global order will be decided long before the maps are redrawn.